The story began with a man bleeding heavily, each breath shallow and ragged. He thought about how far they had come, how much they had endured all around him. Laser beams poured down like deadly rain. He clung to a fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could still defeat the enemy. But in an instant, something tore into his chest. He froze, eyes wide. It took him a moment to realize there was a gaping hole where his heart had been beating seconds before. His knees buckled and he fell. That was when the truth struck him. It was a fatal blow. He crumpled forward, face pressed into the dirt. One last thought flickered in his mind, that he was about to die without ever making a difference. Through blurred vision, he fixed his gaze on the flying humanoid shape ahead. The Liquidator, mankind's most feared adversary. This being had appeared without warning one day and annihilated an entire continent in its wake. Humanity had formed a special force to repel such monsters. The first to join had been a man who famously survived a meteor strike without so much as a scratch. Armed with nothing but a shield. People called him Brian Miller, the world's protecting shield. Another was a sage whose power was said to rival an entire military division. Bella Albright, the great sage. Then there was Jacob Bloomfield, the divine archer who once felled a high-level dragon with a single arrow, and Amy White, the sword saint, hailed as the strongest swordsman in history. And then there was them, the support unit. Around them lay the corpses of fallen comrades. The man bleeding out on the ground really was a mere foot soldier who believed they were little more than sacrificial pawns. He watched the elites fight their skills on a level he could hardly comprehend. He had known the graduates of the World Union Academy were exceptional, but the gap was far wider than he imagined. The elites launched attack after attack against the Liquidator. The sight made him feel useless. He thought that whether the support unit existed or not, the outcome would be the same. Amy continued her assault, stabbing with blinding speed. Gray gritted his teeth. The disparity between them was so crushing it made his chest ache more than his wounds. The Liquidator evaded her with ease until one of her blades drew blood. He found himself impressed that she had managed even that. But then the Liquidator grew serious with one swift, precise strike. He sliced Amy's body clean in half. Her blood splattered across the ground as she fell. Gray's eyes widened in horror. The Liquidator had stopped playing games. Gray could not believe it. A single strike had ended her. The realization hit him hard. There was no chance of victory. He lay in a spreading pool of his own blood, still conscious. Time had passed since the wound to his heart. Yet he lived. He could not understand why. Then, through the ringing in his ears, a weak voice reached him. The voice said that it had finally found him. His blood drips to the ground. Each dropped, transforming into a small point of light which grew into a message summoning him, declaring that he possessed great power. He awoke to find himself in a dark place, surrounded by ancient stone structures. He asked aloud where he was. The barren emptiness made him think of the afterlife ahead. Upon a throne sat a figure like a god, clad in black with horns, a veil across its brow and a golden mark on its chest. Its face was calm, stoic. The figure told him that he had not died and that his wounds had already been healed. Gray's thoughts raced. He saw an image of his battered body projected before him, and asked if it had been healed by the figure. The figure replied that it had not. It was Gray's own power. Gray was bewildered. The figure admitted that it could not fully understand his power, but assured him it was greater than the Liquidators provided he could master it. Gray asked if that meant they could win. The figure said he did not know and advised against false hope, but insisted that the Liquidator must be destroyed. That was why it rose from the throne and drove a hand into Gray's chest. A bright blue light flared and a magic circle formed over his heart. The voice declared that it would lend him its strength. Gray awoke on his own bloodied body, gasping. He reached for his sword, the tip wreathed in dark energy. The voice told him that it was his own power. The mysterious creature explained that Gray's power was not something visible to the naked eye. Gray accepted this with a silent nod, the weight of the words settling over him. At that moment, the Liquidator's gaze shifted. He had noticed Gray. Without hesitation, Gray lunged forward and slashed. The Liquidator caught sight of his face, stunned that such strength still remained among the living. A deep scratch appeared across his chest. Gray realized his blow had connected. He attacked again, emboldened by the proof that his power could harm the monster. The Liquidator warned him not to underestimate him. Then, in a blur, Gray's world twisted. He struggled to process what had happened until the realization struck. His body had been cleaved in half, blood spraying from the ruined like a fountain. The Liquidator, strangely calm, commended him for forcing him to fight at full strength. Darkness then swept across the battlefield, a black mist swallowing the air. From it emerged a hooded figure with a mask, his very form flickering like living black flame in his hands. He carried an enormous black sword. The Liquidator, wary, erected a barrier around himself, but the flame on the figure's left side burned away, revealing a familiar face. Gray's. The Liquidator questioned if he was truly human. Gray's glare was the only answer before he brought his sword down upon the barrier, straining to shatter it. The Liquidator, his eyes narrowed as cracks spread through the shield. It splintered and Gray's blade cut deep. Once more, the Liquidator demanded to know if he was truly human. Gray replied that he wondered the same about himself. They clashed again. Gray admitted to himself that the Liquidator's strength was no small thing. The monster, breathing heavier now, seemed unsettled by Gray's survival. It leaned close, whispering a promise to crush him over and over until he stayed dead. But Gray moved first, his strike spilling yellow blood. The liquidator called him a monster, but his tone carried no defeat. Light flared around his body as he gathered power, forming a magic circle between his clasped hands. He announced that Gray's time was up. Gray gripped his massive sword, waiting for the next move. Night fell in an instant. He darted behind the liquidator, aiming for the neck, but his blade was stopped cold by another barrier. The liquidator declared that within the plane of true dusk, nothing could harm him. He told Gray to cease his futile struggle and to look at the stars. Gray's eyes widened as the reflection of a bright star filled them. It swelled, its glow blinding until it plummeted from the heavens like a burning sun. The impact was cataclysmic, carving a vast crater into the earth. Gray was nowhere to be seen. The liquidator assumed that pulverizing him to dust would end it. But then a portal formed, expanding into a massive magic circle. A voice spoke, acknowledging the immense power gathered. The voice concluded that it was enough to bring someone back. The liquidator recognized the voice. It was Kronos. Kronos addressed the wielder of great power, asking if he could hear him. Since Gray had spent every ounce of his strength, Kronos declared he would send him back to the past. The liquidator cursed his name. Kronos told Gray that this was all he could do for him. A great clock appeared, ticking backward as the final second passed. Kronos said he would entrust the world's fate to him. Gray awoke lying in soft grass, confused. The sky was bright, the air warm. To his right lay his hometown, Renato Village, though it had been destroyed 15 years ago. He recalled Kronos, his words about sending him to the past. It was impossible to believe, yet the proof stood before him. He pushed himself up, noticing a familiar injury on his body. In those days, he was often tormented by Belder and his gang. This time, he promised himself he wouldn't be beaten by the likes of them, though he knew he was too weak to match them. Yet sighing, he admitted that defeating the liquidator still felt like an impossible dream. He resolved to avoid trouble until he grew stronger. But while walking through the forest, fate put him face to face with Belder, the largest and most arrogant of his bullies. Accompanied by 3 others, Belder said he had been searching for Gray and that it had been a hassle finding him. Gray tensed. Belder tossed a sword at his feet and told him to pick it up. When Gray hesitated, Belder accused him of playing dumb, announcing he wanted a mock battle. Gray declined, saying his injury had not yet healed, and thanking him for the offer. Belder insisted the blade was blunt and harmless. Gray countered that even a blunt sword was still iron, and iron could mean. Belder's expression darkened. He barked at Gray to shut his mouth, declaring that he had no right to refuse. If he didn't want a sword, then he could fight barehanded instead. Belder lunged forward without hesitation, catching Gray off guard. Gray couldn't believe the brute intended to beat him, even when he stood unarmed. This didn't feel like a mock battle at all. It reeked of genuine malice, a memory from before his return surfaced. He recalled the military doctor explaining that his swordsmanship had stalled because of an injury he'd suffered as a child. Looking back, Gray realized that was the moment his life as a loser had begun. He sidestepped, evading Boulder's first strike. The ease of the movement confused him. Belder clicked his tongue in frustration and attacked again. Gray ducked under the swing, his body moving on instinct. The two of them fell into a rhythm, a vicious dance where Belder attacked and Gray slipped away with each blow. It wasn't that Belder was slow. Gray realized it was that he himself had grown faster. The revelation dawned on him as Belder's blade passed within an inch of his face. He closed the gap between them, startling the onlookers. The other 3 young men muttered that it seemed like Gray had become an entirely different person. He stooped to pick up the sword. His body might not be the one hardened by endless battle, but his mind held every memory of those fights. Belder came at him again. Gray swung with his uninjured hand. Striking true, Belder let out a sharp groan, stumbling back. Gray was surprised it was enough to knock him off his feet. For a moment he wondered if it was right to fight someone so inexperienced. But pity was wasted on trash like this. Men who had tormented him simply because he couldn't fight back. That was no longer the case. His next attack forced Belder to drop his weapon entirely. Cursing, Belder staggered back. Gray noted how easily he'd surrendered the sword. This was worse than amateur skill. He remarked that Belder clearly had no training in receiving a blow. Stepping closer, Gray told him there was nothing to fear since the blade was dull and perfectly safe to beat someone with. Then he struck. Belder's eyes went wide as blood welled from his shoulder. Shocked, he cried out and fell to his knees. Gray examined the weapon. It was blunt, completely harmless in theory. If it had been sharp, Belder might have been dead without mercy. Gray continued the assault. A straight to the nose sent Belder sprawling on his back, blood gushing. Gray decided to keep using the blunt edge looming over him. He mocked his screams, reminding him that he had been the one to claim such a weapon was safe. His grin twisted into something dangerous. Fear crept into Belder's eyes. He shouted for his companions to stop standing around and attack, but they hesitated. Unnerved by Gray's sudden strength, one suggested they attack from behind. They surrounded him. Gray asked if they wanted another round. Belder barked in order to kill him. Gray admitted he had been willing to overlook the earlier attack, but had now changed his mind. The forest soon erupted with the sounds of violence. When it was over, all 4 bullies were bruised, sporting swollen lumps on their heads, their eyes eyes barely able to open. They knelt meekly, hands resting in their laps. Gray recalled how these same faces had once filled him with fear. He asked if they were from a dojo. Belder replied vaguely that it was something like that. Another admitted they had stopped going, thinking themselves strong enough. Gray scoffed inwardly their definition of strength. Still, he saw potential value in the dojo. It was referral only, and he wanted in. Belder refused, saying he couldn't bear to tell his master he'd lost. Gray swung his sword in front of Belder's face, suggesting they continue what they'd started. Panic set in. Belder bolted, shouting the dojo's location over his shoulder. His speed startled everyone. The three lackeys shouted after him not to leave them behind. They entered the city. Belder asked why Gray wanted the dojo. Gray explained that it had a recommendation slot for the academy. Belder said he had heard of that. Gray stated plainly that this was his goal. One lackey remarked that Gray was already strong enough. Gray replied that even the world's strongest fighters couldn't match the Liquidator. Even with Chrono's power, he hadn't scratched the monster when it was serious. He had no idea how strong he needed to be, but he had an idea where to start. He remembered the fleeting moment during his clash with the Liquidator when he'd controlled the dark power channeling swordsmanship taught by the Sword Saint. If he had trained in the same conditions she had, the fight's outcome might have been different. That, he suspected, was why Kronos had sent him here. They arrived at the dojo where a woman emerged, her sharp gaze scanning them. She asked if her students had tried to use her swordsmanship to bully a civilian, only to be beaten soundly. Her tongue clicked in disapproval. This was Saria, the dojo instructor. Belder stammered that it had only been a mock battle. Sorry. His answer was a brutal strike that sent him crashing into a wall with a deafening thud. The three others froze, eyes wide. She accused him of lying, declaring that if beating an unarmed man was a mock battle, then what she had just done counted as one. 2. Pointing her sword at his face, she ordered him to leave and never return, stripping him of the right to call himself her student. They all muttered agreement and fled. Saria said before Gray, apologizing for the trouble her former students had caused him. Gray replied that there was no need for her to worry about what had happened. Saria thanked him for his understanding, then shifted the conversation to the matter he had come for. "I recommendation to the academy," she said. She wished to apologize again for the trouble caused by Belder and his companions, but as much as she might want to write a letter in his favor, she first needed to see his abilities for herself. She handed him a wooden sword. Gray took it without hesitation. She told him he could make the first move and invited him to attack whenever he was ready. Gray advanced, striking at her without hesitation. The other students in the dojo watched closely, evaluating his movements. Saria noted that his swordsmanship was surprisingly practical for someone his age. There was an unmistakable weight behind his blows, as if he had endured countless battles. When she attacked, he met her strike and deflected it cleanly. In that moment, she understood that Belder and the others could never have matched him. She observed that his style was largely self-taught, though every so often a strike or stance carried the polish of academy training. It made her wonder if someone had once instructed him. His swordplay was rough, yet there was clear talent. She fought a diamond in the rough when it seemed time to conclude the match. She struck at him. He moved to counter. Their blades met in sharp, echoing clashes. She attacked again, but to her surprise, Gray's pace never faltered. He matched her step for step. She had intended only to test his skill, but now she felt her best being drawn out against him. An unfamiliar sensation crept in. As they fought, she realized it was fear. Then he swung with such force that she was forced back a step. She told herself it was nothing more than a wild swing, but in that instant she also saw his weakness. Seizing the moment, she went for the final blow, but her strike never landed. She froze, staring at the severed remains of her sword. Gray, equally stunned, looked at the broken weapon. The sensation running through him was the same he had felt in battle against the Liquidator, proof that he still held that strange power. But it came at a cost. Pain surged through his body, driving him to his knees. Saria asked urgently what was wrong. He realized the truth. His body simply could not keep up with the power. His legs trembled, but he forced himself upright and told her he was fine inside. He resolved never to use that strength recklessly again. For a moment he considered explaining it to her, but seeing her puzzled expression, he decided against it. Even if he told her, she likely would not believe him. Instead, he excused it as getting carried away. Saria, however, knew it was impossible to cut her weapon with a dull wooden sword. She could see that he knew it too. She asked what was troubling him when he gave no real answer. She let the matter drop and returned to the topic of the recommendation. He confirmed he had heard she could provide one. She admitted she could indeed recommend him to the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, the kingdom's finest institution. However, she told him bluntly that she would not recommend he go there. She did not think he belonged in that place. The words stung. They fed into his insecurity, the same doubt that had haunted him since the battle. His belief that he lacked true strength. Saria continued telling him there was another place he should aim for, the World Union Academy. Gray's eyes widened. She explained that he should not settle for being the kingdom's best. He belonged among the world's top warriors. The thought stunned him. That was the place where the Sword Saint and the others had trained. He asked if someone like him could truly be accepted there. there. She answered simply that it was impossible. She knew, and so did he, that his body was far from fit enough to wield a sword at that level. She pointed out that with his current state he might pass for a skilled swordsman at the Royal Academy, but the World Union Academy demanded more. Every student there was a genuine monster. He knew she was right. His current body could not compete. His expression darkened. Saria asked why he was giving up so easily. She reminded him that there were still 9 months until the entrance exam. He countered that 9 months was not much time. She admitted it might not be enough but told him to trust her. Then she asked if he was ready to suffer for the next 9 months. He answered that he did not want to suffer, but he would do it anyway. He placed his trust in her. She liked his answer. Her demeanor shifted, her lips curling into a devilish grin. She announced that his hell was about to begin. These blurred into weeks as Gray underwent relentless training under her guidance. His meals ranged from delicious to questionable. He sparred constantly, refining his swordsmanship, his determination fixed on passing the exam. 8 months later, his transformation was visible. Muscles hardened, movements sharper. Saria declared she had nothing more to teach him and told him to face the exam with confidence. He was confused. There was still a month left. She explained that adjusting to an unfamiliar environment was difficult, so it was best for him to arrive early. She gave him money for travel and a month's food. He hesitated, suspecting she was trying to send him away. She told him he was overthinking it. He then mentioned rumors of an ogre's nest nearby that caught her off guard. He added that there were few guards left in the village. She brushed it off, saying it had nothing to do with them and that aid from the royal capital would arrive soon. She urged him to leave for the exam without worry. He could tell she was lying. He knew the truth. No help would come, and before the village's destruction, she would die in his past life. News had spread that she had been killed confronting the ogre alone, but all he said was that he understood her wishes. He thanked her and said he would be going. She smirked and wished him luck at the exam. Later that night, the forest carried an air of dread. Skeletal remains hung grotesquely from a tree, their jaws forced open by wooden spikes. Saria arrived following the path described in the scout's report. The trail of blood she tracked wound deep into the woods until it ended at a grim, shadowed den. She was about to step inside when a voice asked where she thought she was going. Looking up, she saw Gray perched casually on a tree branch, smiling faintly and calling her master. Surprise flickered in her eyes. She asked why he was here when he was supposed to be on his way to the academy. He countered by asking why she was here, after claiming earlier that the ogre nest would be dealt with by the royal army. She explained that the army could not come due to an emergency, so she had decided to handle the matter herself. She told him not to worry, assuring him she had assessed the situation. The nest's leader was an elite ogre, and the colony numbered 40 to 50 in total. The minions, she admitted, would be the only difficulty. Gray knew better. An ogre's real strength lay in its intelligence and leadership. Being surrounded meant death, and he had already seen this particular future. His master's death and the village's destruction. He told her he wanted to go with her. She refused, insisting she could handle it alone. He tried to persuade her, saying he wanted the chance to gain real combat experience, then asked if she thought he would get in her way. That made her laugh, as she knew she could no longer beat him in a mock battle. Still, she warned that no one could predict what might happen in a real fight against a newly formed nest, and that it was better for him to wait until he had more real-world experience. When she refused to budge, he offered another idea, one that made her pause. He said he would fight her right there, knock her out and deal with the ogre himself. His stance left no doubt he meant it. Eventually she gave in, but on one condition. No matter what happened, he must come back alive. He agreed and told her to do the same. Beneath the cold moonlight, they crouched behind a boulder, watching the colony. The nest was built in a place with no escape routes, a sign of the ogre's confidence. It also meant that once they went in, retreat would be nearly impossible. Saria scanned the camp but saw no sign of the boss, guessing it was inside the largest tent. They would have to thin the numbers before it emerged. She told Gray to take one flank while she handled the other. He nodded and they struck. One ogre barely had time to register their presence before Saria was upon it, her blade removing its head in a single stroke. The head hit the ground and another ogre immediately raised the alarm. Within moments, a horde came rushing on his side. Gray moved with ruthless precision, cutting down enemy after enemy. Saria was equally efficient. Soon the ground was littered with corpses and they regrouped in the center of the carnage. She praised his performance, remarking on how unbelievable it was for a first battle. He dismissed the compliment, telling her to stay alert. They were only getting started, but inside he felt something was wrong. These ogres were far too weak. If this was truly their strength, Saria could have handled them alone. The real danger was still in that tent. Then he saw them, a pair of glowing red eyes in the darkness fixed on him. An uneasy chill gripped his chest. Without hesitation, he told her they had to leave immediately. She asked why, but his expression turned urgent and he shouted for her to run. She read the fear in his voice and complied. They sprinted for the exit, only for a massive figure to drop from above, blocking their escape. It was an elite ogre. Saria smirked, saying it was an honor that the boss had come to meet them, but Gray told her this wasn't the boss. A deafening roar tore through the air, forcing Saria Saria to clap her hands over her ears. Dozens more ogres burst into the clearing, eyes wild. Behind them stood a towering, monstrous figure. Gray said it was far beyond an elite. An ogre general, the true master of the nest. The elite blocked the rear, the horde blocked the front, and the general loomed over all of them without even moving. Its presence alone was suffocating. The moment Saria heard the name, she knew the fight was unwinnable. She glanced toward the elite and suggested they cut it down to make an escape. She lunged, striking its shoulder, but the wound closed almost instantly. Gray told her it was pointless. The roar had empowered every ogre present, making them stronger and giving them rapid regeneration. Even she was now struggling to bring one down. He told her not to focus on winning, just to buy him time. Concern edged her voice as she asked what he intended to do. He answered with a single plan: kill the ogre general. An axe-wielding ogre swung at him, trying to knock his weapon away. He grew irritated as more of them closed in from all sides. One well-placed blow shattered his sword entirely. He understood then his weapon could not withstand the power of a boosted ogre. The ogre swung at him again, and Gray leapt back just in time. Relief flickered for a moment. He still had a spare sword, but he knew it would not last long either. Seeing his situation, Saria tossed her extra weapon toward him. He caught it and thanked her. Now armed with two blades, he focused on a single goal: cut through the horde and reach the ogre general. The rest could wait. Drawing the second sword, he slashed through the ogres in his path in a blur of movement. One clawed at his cheek, leaving a thin scratch as it swung. Another came at him with an axe, the impact jarring his arms as he blocked. He clipped his tongue, forcing both swords forward to push it back. More ogres surged toward him above the din. The ogre general's weapon began to glow, followed by a roar so loud it rattled the ground. Gray flinched as the horde seemed to swell with power. Their movements faster, their blows heavier. He understood instantly. The general had figured out his plan. It was smart. Too smart. Their weapons clashed again, his blade ringing against an axe, the force pushing him backward. Gritting his teeth, he kept moving forward, hacking through as many as he could. But then an ogre barreled into him, pinning him down while another raised its axe. He wrenched one arm free and drove his blade into the clinging ogre's neck. In that moment, he realized their intent. They were throwing themselves at him just to wear his weapons down. A shadow loomed overhead. Another ogre leapt, fist cocked. He brought up his sword in defense, but the impact was monstrous, hurling him across the ground. His chest burned, blood filling his mouth. His hands shook as he rose to one knee, breath ragged. One sword lay in pieces beside him. He was down to his last. The truth sank in with only one blade facing the horde, and the general was impossible. Experience from before his regression told him as much. He called out to Saria, telling her to run while they were still focused on him. She only looked amused when he pressed, asking if she planned to die for nothing. She replied with a grim expression. Then her tone shifted. She admitted she could not run at all. His eyes dropped to her leg. A deep gash bled heavily. His stomach turned cold. Now there were no options left. He had come back in time with one purpose: to defeat the liquidators. But this fight might be where his life ended. He swung his sword with everything he had, but the steel finally gave way under the strain, shattering into fragments. Still he refused to stop. He forced himself to remember the sensation of that power he had touched before, the one that could cut down impossible foes. He closed his eyes, teeth clenched, forcing the memory into his mind as the ogres closed in. The moment the final shard of his sword spun through the air, his eyes snapped open, glowing red. The feeling returned in his hands, formed a blade of pure shadow, its edge dripping with lethal intent. With a single swing, he cleaved through a cluster of ogres, severing heads in a spray of blood. Mist curled along his blade and face. Saria stared in confusion. Gray's expression was grim, yet he turned to her and assured her it was all right. The ogre general's weapon glowed again, only to be sliced apart in an instant while Sarah's attention was fixed on that. Another ogre lunged for her. She cut it down with surprising ease. Realizing the truth, without the general's boost, their blows were nothing. The battle dragged on into the late hours of the night when the last corpse hit the ground. Gray apologized for breaking her sword. She waved it off, saying he had saved her life. He offered the broken weapon back to her, but before she could ask about the strange power, his legs buckled. He collapsed face first into the dirt. Panic broke through her composure as she shouted his name. Gray's mind sank into darkness. All around him was black, except for a single door bound in chains. Black flames began to eat through the bindings. He recognized the sensation. It was the same power he had just unleashed. The thought of opening it made him uneasy, yet he stepped forward. Then a presence appeared behind him, so heavy and terrifying it froze him in place. His breathing grew quick and shallow. He knew without question, if he opened that door now, he would die. A voice spoke from the darkness, telling him he had made the right choice. He jolted awake, gasping, drenched in sweat. Saria, startled, turned toward him. Relief softened her face as she told him he was finally awake. When he asked where he was, she explained he was in the village infirmary. He had been unconscious for 5 days, and she admitted quietly that she had been afraid he might never wake. When Gray realized he had been unconscious for 5 days, the truth sank in. He had pushed his body far beyond its limits. Saria remarked that calling it pushing himself was putting it lightly, but she set the comment aside and asked if he could move. Gray tried only to discover that his right arm felt useless. He could move in with effort, but there was no strength behind the motion. A pit formed in his stomach at the thought of never holding a sword again. Worse still, an odd bruise marred the skin, a blotch as though black ink had been splattered along his arm. Saria seemed unsurprised. She told him she had expected his movement would be poor. He wondered silently if she could even see the black mark. Then he admitted aloud that his dominant arm was all but powerless. She confirmed his fear he would not be healing properly anytime soon. The bones in his arm had been completely shattered. Shock hit him. There was no pain, which only unsettled him further. Saria explained that they had used a magic potion for treatment that made his eyes widen. Such things were expensive beyond reason. She told him not to worry about it. The village chief had provided the potion himself. Gray could not fathom why someone would give such a priceless resource to him. Saria reminded him plainly. He was the village's hero. He was still trying to process that when the door burst open and the chief entered. Gray immediately thanked him for the potion, but the chief insisted the thanks should go the other way. The man spoke with strong emotion, telling Gray that he had fought and slain an ogre general, a creature so dangerous that even troops from multiple towns could not so much as wound it, and that monster had been headed straight for their village. Clasping Gray's hand tightly, the chief said that without him and Saria there would be no potion, no infirmary, no survivors. None of them would even be alive to speak now. Gray tried to brush it off, but the chief swore it was no exaggeration. The truth? Nodded Gray before his regression. The village had been wiped out by the ogre attack. Now it still stood. The chief offered to explain everything in detail. If Gray still did not understand the importance of what he had done, then he added that he had heard Gray was planning to take the academy entrance exam and asked if it was true. That single question snapped Gray into a flurry of thoughts. The exam was only a week after the battle. 5 of those days had been spent unconscious, leaving him just 2 days until it began. The trip to the academy was a 3-day walk. His face drained of color. On horseback, it would take a single day, but he had no money for that. He quickly asked the chief if he could borrow one. The chief, already anticipating this, said the best horse in the village had been prepared for him. Saria joked that if he had not woken up today, they would have tied him to the saddle and sent him there asleep. She opened the door, letting sunlight spill in outside. The horse waited, surrounded by a crowd holding banners, shouting thanks and wishing him luck. Villagers stepped forward to thank him personally. One man offered a pouch when Gray asked what it was. The man explained it was money the entire village had gathered together. After hearing how expensive applying to the World Union Academy could be, the gesture struck him deeply. He smiled, thanked them, and remarked that failing the exam would make it hard to face them again. Saria told him not to worry. He was the only candidate who had slain an ogre general. Still, his gaze drifted to his right arm. She reminded him his left still worked fine, and that was more than enough. She also told him not to rely on that strange power. He pointed out the passing with only one arm wouldn't be easy. She countered that his ability would be obvious to the examiners regardless. Her certainty left him with no choice but to believe her. He thanked her, saying that after hearing it put that way, he would have to pass. The village had survived. The world was no longer the same as it had been before his regression, and that meant the future could be changed through his power. With that, he set off. The horse carried him swiftly, and he arrived just in time. He even patted the animal's neck, thanking it for the effort. Ahead lay a city encircled by a great lake, the World Union Academy inside the central arena. The host announced the start of exam ticket distribution until the process was complete. All examinees were to remain there. The crowd was large, but only 20 would pass. Some years 50 were chosen, other years only 1. The host introduced Professor Ariel, who strode in and began distributing tickets immediately. She instructed them to take the paper that appeared before them with a snap of her fingers. Golden light filled the air and a sheet of paper materialized before each candidate. Gray saw his own examinee, number 513 fencing course. Ariel explained they would see only their number and assigned course, assuring them this was how it was done every year. She smiled faintly, stating that the academy judged neither age, gender, nationality nor status, not even names. Only those who passed the exam and earned the right to cross the bridge would be asked for their name, and even then they could give a false one if they wished. Gray frowned in confusion. He had left his sword at the inn, yet his papers still listed him for fencing. Ariel explained the course assignment was based on appearance. If she had gotten anyone's wrong, they were to raise their hand. The examinees stood in stunned silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. Many whispered among themselves, unable to believe that Professor Ariel had been able to assign courses for hundreds of people simply by looking at them. Some suspected she had researched every candidate beforehand. Others speculated that she must have used some kind of mind-reading magic. But after a few moments, no one raised their hand to dispute their placement. Ariel concluded with a small nod that no one had been assigned. She then announced the exam schedules and instructed everyone to check their tickets. Gray looked down and saw that his was set for the first day at 11 a.m. The sight made his stomach sink. He had been hoping for at least a few extra days for his arm to recover. Ariel reminded them that the test would be a one-shot practical exam. If they were late, they would be disqualified. No exceptions, no rescheduling. scheduling. Gray rubbed his arm, thinking about how little strength he could summon in it, and prayed silently that it might feel better by morning. When the next day arrived, his hopes were dashed. His arm was exactly the same. He would have to take the exam in this state. His number was called to the arena entrance. Taking a deep breath, he told himself to focus and not let pessimism take over. His left arm still worked and he could move his right to a limited extent. The rest would have to come from technique before his turn. He studied the examiners in action. The man invited the current examinee to make the first move. The candidate attacked swinging heavily, but the examiner sidestepped with ease. The candidate shouted in frustration, gripping his sword with both hands for a more forceful strike. The examiners blocked the blow one-handed, crushing the man's spirit in that single display. Then, without hesitation, the examiners surged forward and blasted the examinee off his feet with a single swing. The candidate hit the ground hard and the match was called over. He was told to retrieve his weapon and leave. Watching this, Gray allowed himself a small, wry smile. He already knew this was going to be impossible. His number was called. As he stepped forward, he could hardly believe he was about to face someone who had just dismantled a larger opponent with one arm. He was told to make the first move despite feeling like he had no chance. He resolved to give it everything, he charged, recalling Saria's teachings that a sword is not swung by the arms alone, but through power generated from the entire body. Even if his right arm was weak, he could drive force through his legs, back and core. He swung. The examiner ducked under the strike, nervousness twisted in his gut. This was not his usual way of fighting. If swordsmanship without arm strength were easy, no one would train their arms at all. The examiner countered, and Gray was surprised. The strike was slow enough for him to block. The power was immense, but the speed and technique were nowhere near his master's. If he relied on the swordsmanship Saria had drilled into him, he might be able to compensate for his arm's weakness. His eyes sharpened. The examiner was slower than expected, not as overwhelming as he had feared. Sorry, his voice echoed in his mind, promising he would pass. Their blades clashed, and for a moment Gray overpowered him. Hope began to spark, but the fight continued and the difference in raw power showed. The examiner's form was solid. Breaking through it was no simple task. With one arm. Still, Gray saw his movements grow rougher. He baited the examiner in waiting for the right moment. The man committed to a wide swing, exactly what Gray wanted. Gray shifted his weight, stepped around him, and in an instant was behind him. No matter the gap in strength, if he could get behind, he could win. His blade hovered just an inch from the examiner's back, and then the order to halt rang out. Gray froze, confused. It felt too soon to end. Another examiner announced that the time limit had expired. The result was declared a draw. Gray's eyes widened. He loosened his grip on his weapon, his body sagging in defeat. He had fought with everything he had yet could not win. Leaving the arena, he felt the weight of failure pressing heavily. If he could not defeat the examiner here, the road ahead would be steep, he told himself. His arm would heal next year and he would try again before stepping out for good. He glanced back at the arena, quietly thanking it for the fight. 1 week later, in meeting room 53 of the World Union Academy, the head of the academy asked the professors for their impressions of the candidates. Now that the exams had concluded, one complained of exhaustion. An older professor commented that having every instructor observe all candidates together was inefficient, suggesting they divide the workload next year. Another professor disagreed, stating firmly that no amount of convenience was worth the risk of overlooking true talent. The head of the academy sighed, reminding the professors that he had asked for their thoughts on the examinees, not complaints about the system. He began with the swordsmanship course, asking who had passed. The instructors reviewed the recordings. One professor reported that, as always, those who defeated the examiners automatically passed, while the rest would be evaluated based on the quality of their performance and how long they lasted within the 15-minute time limit. He then asked the other swordsmanship instructors for their recommendations. One professor replied that aside from those who won outright, candidates 5217 and 753 stood out. Another agreed, adding that there was little point in including more as the rest would struggle to keep pace in class. The first professor asked if anyone disagreed, but no one spoke up. As the meeting moved toward confirming the final list for the swordsmanship course, Professor Ariel spoke up, asking about candidate 513. The head glanced at her, curious. She repeated her question. What did they think of number 513? The screen replayed his match. A professor scoffed, calling him a little guy who had nearly won but relied too much on traps to catch the examiners. Others noted that his technique was solid, but his strength was lacking, making it clear he had been outmatched from the start. The brown-haired professor with the mustache dismissed him outright, saying he simply wasn't good enough. The others nodded in agreement. Ariel sat in silence, disbelief creeping across her face. To her, it was astonishing that so many had watched, yet failed to notice what she had seen. If everyone was blind to it, she thought, perhaps having all the professors observed together was nothing but a waste. The next day, Gray stood with his exam ticket in hand, waiting for the results of the swordsmanship course. Only 6 names would be called. The air was tense. The first number announced was 5, the exam ticket burning to ash in its owner's hand. Next came 217, followed by 432 and 650. 715, then 753 and 925. That was the end. Gray's heart sank. His number was not called. The successful candidates were told to cross the bridge and complete enrollment by day's end. Cheers erupted around him for the victors, but he stood still, his face shadowed with disappointment. Then came an unexpected announcement: the Divine Eye's special admission. Within seconds, his number was called and his ticket burned with blue flames. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gray froze, too stunned to react. Around him, whispers turned sharp. Some muttered that the academy must have cheated, that this was a disgrace to its name. He had never heard of this special admission before. Doubt nodded him. Had Saria done something? But no, she had never mentioned it. An elderly man silenced the murmurs, declaring that the Divine Eye was a long-standing, prestigious category that had produced heroes for centuries. The crowd scoffed, claiming that prestige was long gone. They pointed to past Divine Eye selections: Amy White, Bella Albright, Leek Muller, Jacob Bloomfield, and mocked them as failures. Gray knew the truth. Those same people had been part of the main force against the Liquidator. Now his name would stand alongside theirs. An announcement rang out. The entrance ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. Students were instructed to change into their uniforms and gather at the plaza in front of the main office. The uniform was black, bearing the Academy's emblem in silver. Gray looked sharp in his. Arriving early at the plaza, a small group had gathered, unsure if they were in the right place. There was no stage or seating. A man rushed toward them, apologizing for the delay and explaining there had been a mix-up. He asked them to step back so stairs could be placed there. Once they moved, he knelt, pressing his palm to the ground. A large magic circle flared to life, and the earth shifted before their eyes. An entire structure emerged from nothing. Apologizing again, the man told them they could sit wherever they liked. The students were stunned. Teleportation magic on this scale was almost unheard of. Gray sat down, thinking the Academy had simply wanted a venue where the building could be prominently displayed. Extravagant, yes, but impressive. Some students remarked there were far too many seats for only 30. Amidst the girl sitting near Gray admitted she didn't know why her life until now had been nothing but sword training. Another explained that the Academy drew top candidates from around the world. She pointed to the sky. The first girl's jaw dropped at the sight of aircraft and dragons flying overhead. Gray's gaze locked on the magic airship Strata Queen. He had boarded it once during the Liquidator's subjugation campaign, and it was among the largest airships in existence. That the Academy would use it just for an entrance ceremony was staggering. The airship landed and more students disembarked. With everyone present, the ceremony began. The headmaster gave his speech. Gray found it dull, just like any other ceremony. The next segment introduced the top students from each course. Leonard, the highest ranked in swordsmanship, was called first. As he walked to the stage, students whispered about how he had defeated his examiners instantly. Some even claimed his skill rivaled that of the professors. Gray watched closely before reaching the podium. Leonard turned to the head staff and asked if he was free to speak his mind. They granted permission and he gave them a polite thanks. He began by stating that he had a single complaint to make to the Academy before addressing it. He offered a formal greeting to his fellow students and those who had earned admission through what he called the proper way. He said it was an honor to stand among them and hoped they would graduate as people capable of making meaningful contribution to the world. He encouraged them to work together, saying he looked forward to the day when they could all aim high as students of the prestigious World Union Academy. Then his tone shifted. He declared that among them were people who did not deserve to be there. He turned to Professor Ariel and asked if he was wrong. She was caught off guard, but replied that every student present had passed the Academy's rigorous process. While she admitted some might not match his strength, she argued it would be unwise to exclude them. She then asked him why he had singled her out. Leon Hart's eyes narrowed. He said he was not talking about those who had passed normally, but about the students she had backdoored into the Divine Eye. Special admission. Then he called for whoever that special admission student was to stand up, return their uniform and leave the Academy. Tension swept across the plaza. Gray, stunned by Leon Hart's hostility, recalled that the man had been sitting beside him earlier. Relief crept in when he realized Leonard didn't know his face. If he stayed silent, he could avoid being drawn into this. Professor Ariel only remarked that the students this year were lively. Leonard, feeling ignored, accused her again of letting unqualified students slip in. She didn't respond at first. Then suddenly she leaned in and whispered in his ear, asking if he truly believed he was stronger than that kid. The move startled the entire arena. Leonard stiffened, then gritted his teeth and answered yes. He asked if she was challenging him to prove it. She smiled faintly and suggested a bet. His interest sharpened. She wagered both her position and the special admission students' enrollment. Gray's confusion grew. He still had no idea what was happening. Leonard asked if she intended to make him fight the special admission student. Ariel replied that she would never do something so dull, adding that if Gray went all out, Leonard would be dead. As a responsible teacher, she said she wouldn't risk their lives. Instead, she proposed a safer contest, a monster challenge. She noted that Leonard was better at fighting beasts than people. He glared, but conceded she knew him well and asked for the details. She explained that each would face a monster of her choosing, with the creatures increasing in difficulty each round. The first to fail would lose. If Gray lost, she would resign and all special admission students would be expelled. If Leonard lost, he would follow any order she gave. He asked what kind of monsters she meant. Without hesitation, she named the first target an ogre general, then teased him by asking if that was too easy. The crowd gasped, but Gray remained unreadable, only wondering why she had chosen that enemy. Leonard erupted, saying no one could defeat such a creature alone. Ariel clarified that they had an entire year to prepare. That only fueled his anger. He argued that if anyone could swallow a disaster-class monster in a year, there would be no monster problem in the first place. Then, catching his breath, he accused her of making the task impossible just to avoid a clear winner. Confidently, he announced he wouldn't play alone. Ariel smirked and added one last condition. If it ended in a draw, Leonard would be the winner. She repeated the stakes. If Gray failed to kill the ogre general, she would be fired and the special admits expelled. She asked him what he thought. He stared at her as if she lost her mind. Convinced the bet was stacked against her, she took his silence as consent. He warned her it had better not be a weakened ogre general. She calmly assured him it would not. With a flick of her hand, a feather pen appeared in the air, and a magic contract materialized. She told him the terms were already written. If he had no objections, he could sign. He read it, then agreed, though he couldn't help asking if she truly believed the boy could win. Her answer was ambiguous. Who knows? Before she returned to her seat, other professors whispered, questioning her sanity. Some speculated she was using this as an excuse to retire. It wasn't impossible. She was past her prime. Gray understood. He had no choice now. The bet was set, yet something gnawed at him. Why had she included the monster? He had already fought before enrollment. Despite giving a full year's deadline, she met his gaze, then pressed a finger to her lips. He understood she was playing dirty. The opening ceremony concluded, and students dispersed to their assigned classes. The first subject was basic magic. Some were surprised to begin lessons on the very first day, but the academy wasted no time. Every moment counted. The professor began with the fundamentals. How to harness and channel magic. The professor began his lecture by explaining that the human body contains a hidden energy called ether, which can be guided through the body's magic circuits to cast spells. He scribbled diagrams on the board as he spoke, his tone confident and precise. Gray sat quietly in the back of the classroom. At first, he worried about whether he could keep up, but soon he realized this was the same material he'd learned back in boot camp. So far, so easy. But there was one serious problem. Of all the classes he could have been assigned, he'd ended up in the same one as Leonard. Gray silently prayed that Leonard wouldn't find out he was the Divine Eye's special admission student. The professor caught him staring off and called him out for losing focus barely 5 minutes into the lesson. Gray was shocked. He'd only glanced away for a moment, and he was all the way in the back. He quickly apologized. The professor challenged him. If he looked so confident, why not prove it in front of the class? He even taunted him, saying he must at least know basic magic. Gray politely explained that since they were in the swordsmanship course, he thought magic ability wasn't a requirement. The professor disagreed. Even a swordsman, he said, should know the basics of magic, at the very least to coordinate effectively with mages. Understanding simple spells and how they feel in use was essential. Gray recognized the explanation. It was exactly the same one from boot camp. He asked if they would be learning Ether Bullet. The professor's brow lifted, and he asked if Gray could already use it. Gray confirmed that he could, silently thanking his grueling boot camp training. Seeing an opportunity, the professor decided to make things interesting. He announced that Lionheart, whom he called Leon, could also use Ether Bullet. Leonard confirmed this and remarked that he trained in both swordsmanship and magic long before entering the academy, implying it might be risky for someone else to face him. The professor brushed it off. It was just ether bullets, after all. No one was going to die. He added that he wouldn't ask Leonard to hold back either. Then, with a sly smile, he revealed to the entire class that Gray was the Divine Eye student for the year. Every head turned toward Gray. He felt the trouble closing in. The professor looked almost gleeful at the stir he'd caused. Leon Hart's gaze hardened. He said he would show Gray the reality of the academy, then told him to step forward. They faced each other. The professor explained that at his signal, they would fire ether bullets at the same time. Gray knew he had only trained in magic for a few days. During boot camp, and even if the professor claimed it wouldn't be fatal, he doubted it would end without injury. The signal came. Leonard launched a small orb of pale blue. Light gray zone casting produced a much larger, intensely glowing sphere. The reaction was immediate. Faces froze. Murmurs stopped. Even Gray stared, surprised as his ether bullet completely overpowered Leon Hart's. A sharp cry escaped Leonard as the professor hurriedly threw up a barrier, but the barrier cracked, then shattered, allowing the blast to knock Leonard off his feet. A wave of wind and light swept through the room, rattling desks and making students shield their eyes. Leonard groaned from the floor but managed to stand, insisting he was fine. The professor exhaled in relief, but his mind was elsewhere. That shot could have killed Leonard outright if the barrier hadn't softened the impact, and what unsettled him more, he didn't know a single professor who could produce an ether bullet that strong. He turned to Gray and demanded to know what he'd just done. Gray was genuinely puzzled. Leonard Ether Bullet had felt weak, almost like it was a different spell entirely. He wondered if the Ether Bullet he'd learned in the subjugation squad was different from the Academy's version. He asked if perhaps he had used the wrong spell. The professor assured him it was still Ether Bullet, but it was made from super compressed ether, not the normal kind. The class erupted in whispers. Many had never even heard of such a thing. The professor admitted that even skilled mages struggled to control super compressed ether, yet Gray had produced it and shaped it into a perfect spell. He said there was no one else in the academy capable of that feat. Some students began to believe this was exactly why the Divine Eye admission existed. Others argued Gray should have been placed in the magic course from the start. Gray, however, felt uneasy. Every spell he'd learned at boot camp had been like this. Back then, he'd been nothing special compared to his squad mates. He told the professor that with enough practice, anyone should be able to do it. The professor burst into laughter, loud and incredulous. Then he suddenly gripped Gray's shoulders and declared that he should transfer to the magic course, promising to personally vouch for him. In his opinion, Gray was more talented in magic than in swordsmanship. Gray declined politely, saying he'd always been told he wasn't good at magic. That only made the professor laugh harder. He called Gray a once-in-a-generation genius, a prodigy. The academy would be mad to waste. He said whoever told Gray he lacked magical talent clearly didn't know what they were talking about, and insisted again that Gray should switch. The room went silent. This professor was famous for rarely praising anyone, yet here he was, praising Gray relentlessly. Gray laughed awkwardly, but then something clicked. He remembered exactly where he'd first heard about ether compression in his previous life at boot camp. Someone had told him that in the old days, people didn't even know about Jude Lifeforce, and that proper magic was much harder to cast back then. Mages had to compress ether and hope it mixed with you by chance. A woman with pale blue hair and golden eyes had once called that method pathetic. Back in the present, Gray asked the professor if he had ever heard of Rude. The confused look on the man's face told him everything. This world didn't know it existed. He realized what this meant. The techniques he'd learned were knowledge from the future, and he knew he had to keep that to himself. The professor circled back, asking again if Gray wanted to transfer. Gray bowed and declined firmly, saying his heart was with the sword. The professor accepted, but told him to come see him anytime if he changed his mind from now on, he added. Gray could leave class early or look as bored as he wanted. The lecture was far too basic for him anyway. The other students were shocked. Meanwhile, Leonard watched Gray with an unreadable expression, one hand pressed to his chest. His cheeks flushed faintly as he addressed him as Lord Gray. The sudden shift in tone made Gray shiver. It was unsettling. Later that day, Gray received a letter from Professor Ariel asking him to come to her office. The unexpected summons left him wondering if she, too, was going to push him toward the magic course. When he arrived, she called out that the door was unlocked. He stepped inside, only to be attacked without warning. Instincts kicked in. His sword was in his hand, deflecting the strike with ease. The girl who had attacked froze in shock. Gray stared at her, equally startled. Her face. It was familiar, like someone he had seen before. Gray felt a strange pull of recognition, certain he had seen her somewhere before. From the far side of the room, the sound of slow, deliberate applause broke the silence. Professor Ariel's voice followed, warm but amused as she remarked that it was not bad at all. Seated casually on a chair by the window, she smiled and said she had known her eyes hadn't deceived her. Two other instructors walked over. One of them asked Bella if she had held back in that attack, or if Ariel had told her to go easy. The other added that her movements had been flawless, yet her projectile had been knocked away far too easily. It looked unnatural. Gray's heart skipped a beat at the name Bella. Bella Albright the sorceress. Ariel cut them off, her tone suddenly sharp. She asked if they were being serious. If they couldn't even tell whether Bella had held back, then perhaps they should resign from their posts as professors. The two exchanged awkward glances, raising their hands in surrender and saying they were only joking. Bella opened her palm in a small gesture of defeat and admitted, a little unwillingly, that unfortunately she had to confess the truth. Gray, still tense, asked what exactly they were doing. Ariel smiled and explained that they had made a bet on whether he could block Bella's sudden strike. Thanks to him, she had won a tidy sum. She flipped a gold coin toward him, telling him it was his share. He stared at it, stunned. A gold coin for him. It was a small fortune. One of the other instructors looked at Gray with a thoughtful expression and said that from their earlier exchange it seemed as though he had deliberately avoided using his dominant hand, almost as if he were protecting an arm that couldn't move properly. Another asked if they thought it was due to an injury. The first replied that rather than obvious physical damage to the muscles, it seemed more like something deeper. Bella agreed, saying that a simple injury alone couldn't cause that kind of reaction. Gray felt his chest tighten. These people could see through far too much with a single glance. One of the instructors remarked that if they couldn't at least notice such things, they wouldn't be qualified to teach at the academy. They also noted that Ariel had seemed aware of it back during the exam. Ariel brushed her hair back and told the other two that if they understood now, they could leave. Gray was her student and she would not give him up. The two exchanged a look and one said they would for now acknowledge his potential, but one added that nonetheless, if his injury doesn't heal, that would still mean that he fails to meet the academy's admission standards. With that, they left. Ariel then told Gray that she had heard from Professor Carlos about his use of super compressed ether in class. She lifted her coffee cup and said that meant he already knew what it was. She added that Carlos had come to her office requesting that Gray be transferred to the magic course, but she had, of course, refused, setting the cup down. Her gaze sharpened, telling him she believed he was more suited to the sword than to magic. Bella added that from what she had seen, he didn't even look like he practiced magic compression at all. There were no signs of training in it. Ariel's eyes could tell in an instant. Gray took a sip of coffee and thought it best not to lie here. He admitted she was correct. Ariel then asked if he minded telling her what trick he had used, promising to keep it secret and even reward him. Resting a hand on Bella's shoulder, she said she truly needed to know for this girl's sake, for the sorceress's sake. He repeated, then correcting himself quickly to say, for Bella's sake. Gray thought he had nearly called her sorceress aloud. Ariel explained that while Bella was a genius in magical theory, her practical application was far from top tier. Ariel lowered her head and admitted that for some reason, she simply couldn't master ether compression, and that was why she couldn't produce super compressed ether. Gray recalled hearing of Bella Albright's reputation as a late bloomer, and now understood the reason behind her limitation. Ariel continued saying that according to Carlos, when Gray had used super compressed ether, it hadn't looked like he was compressing at all. If there were a way to use it without actually compressing, Bella wouldn't have to be sent to Professor Bradley. The name made Gray's hand tremble around his cup. He asked if she meant Varian Bradley. Ariel confirmed it, noting that of course, Gray knew the man. His notoriety was impossible to miss. Bradley had conducted countless human experiments, killing many in the process, and had caused a magical disaster that took tens of thousands of lives. He was one of history's most vile magical criminals. In this time period, he hadn't yet been caught. Ariel explained that if Bella couldn't produce super compressed ether by the end of the year, she would be sent to him for surgery. Gray was horrified. That was clearly a terrible idea. Ariel confirmed it, saying that while the operation was presented as a means to enhance magical ability, it was, in truth, human experimentation. The matter wasn't public knowledge, but rumors spoke of many who had died or been ruined because of it. Bella admitted it was dangerous and frightening, but if she couldn't use super compressed ether by year's end, she would be expelled. Ariel told her bluntly that she would rather see her drop out than let that man destroy her body. Gray's fists clenched. He knew magic the people of this time had never heard of. If he revealed it, he might alter the course of history. But the vision of a bloody future and his companion's gruesome deaths rose in his mind. Damn it, he thought if that hellish future could be changed, all the better. He set down his cup and said he understood. He would teach Bella how to use super compressed ether. Later in the arena, the setting sun cast a warm glow over the space. Gray drew diagrams on the board, explaining everything he knew about magic. He reminded them that, as agreed, they must never tell anyone he had taught them. Ariel smiled, saying, of course, and that they had even signed a magical contract to ensure it. If either of them broke the deal, they would both die. Gray asked what she thought of his lecture. Ariel brushed her hair aside and said that simply knowing about the existence of wood was enough to open her eyes, but the knowledge he had revealed went far beyond that. Bella added that his explanation was concise and well-structured, saying it felt like listening to a magic lecture from 100 years in the future. Her eyes gleamed as she said that just hearing his words had likely advanced magical history by a century. Gray, however, knew it was actually knowledge from only 10 years ahead, though to them it must have felt like 100. Ariel admitted there was much she couldn't be a judge, and asked Bella if she thought his words could be true. Bella said it was very possible, as nothing he said contradicted current magical theory. Ariel concluded that the quickest way to know was to test it, and that was why they were there. Bella turned to Gray, saying that if everything he said was true, then this spell should succeed. She raised her staff and a golden magic circle unfolded from her staff. She said this was her full power. Gray stared in disbelief. Bella Albright's full strength was said to be capable of burning an entire city to ash, and she was infamous for struggling to control her immense, magical tome. Blinding beams of light burst from her staff, flooding the entire arena with brilliance. Even she froze in surprise as a massive column of energy roared skyward, tearing a huge crater into the arena's center with an earth-shaking explosion. He reels back, eyes wide, and he shouts to wait a second as a golden pillar detonates from the circle and spears the sky. The blast peels across the arena in rings. Heat and light whip past him like knives. He throws himself into the surge, blades of radiance passing a breath from his face and braces against the shock. Fire curls toward him and he hunches behind his forearm, forcing his stance to hold. He thinks that if she didn't manage to control it at the last second, he would already be ash. The wall of flame cinches into a ring around his body, and he watches it spin, alive and obedient. He thinks with a sharp exhale that it literally saved his life. Bella, framed in the maelstrom, lifts her staff in both hands and says that she did it. She adds, a little breathless, that she tried controlling it to the spell, screams downward like a comet, and slams into the arena's heart. The inferno blossoms, then keeps blooming. A dragon of light rides out of the impact, its coils clawing at the dusk. Bella laughs up at it and says that it is so fun, then staggers midair and mutters that, but before dropping with her cloak fluttering, she says that she is out of mana. Gray lunges and catches her before she hits the floor, easing her down against him and telling her to relax. A moment later, Bella's breathing evens her face slack with sudden sleep. Gray, checking her pulse, explains that she simply fell asleep because she ran out of ether. He looks up as Professor Ariel, the red-haired woman, strides through the settling cinders. She remarks that still, that was marvelous. She tips her chin toward the fire-scarred arena and says that to think she put together magic on that scale in such a short amount of time. Bella, half drowsing against Gray, mumbles that it's not her who is amazing, it's the theory. She adds that she can create super compressed ether. Gray answers with a wry smile, but it's her theory, though. Professor Ariel considers them, then nods once and states that now that Bella can create super compressed ether, she no longer needs the surgery. She says that she will tell Bradley herself to call it off. She looks back to the towering afterimage of flame and says she's glad they avoided the risky surgery, but she's especially glad Bella didn't lose her magic control. Gray, following her gaze, asks warily about her magic control. Professor Ariel answers yes and explains that although Bradley's surgery can increase one's magical output, it comes at the expense of control. She continues that exactly how it works is a secret, but it seems to be a surgery that forcibly breaks one's limiter. Gray rubs his jaw and says that is that so? Then wonders if the reason the sorceress from his past life couldn't control her powerful magic was because of that surgery. The thought trails Ariel cuts across gently that in any case, thanks to him, Bella is now able to create super compressed ether, thus fulfilling the terms of their contract. She squares to Gray Violet's sigils unfurling at her fingertips, and tells him that now it's her turn to fulfill her part of the contract. She adds, first of all, about his arm, there's magic she wants to use on it. A cool cerulean radiance blossoms, rings, runes, and bright moth-like butterflies of light spill from her hand and whirl around Gray's ruined forearm. The glow knits and threads. Sparks drift like snow in deep water. The storm of blue wings rises and then dissolves. Ariel studies the hand as sensation returns and asks how it is. Gray flexes, astonished, and says that he can move it. He clenches a fist and adds breathless, "Thank you so much, Professor." He frowns, remembering months of failure, and says that not even a magic healing potion could cure it. So how? She gives a small pleased sound and instructs him not to compare her nerves, restoring magic with average magic healing potions. Then, with a measuring look, she asks if it really moves the way it used to. She gestures toward the practice yard and tells him to try swinging a sword and find out. He answers yes. He retrieves his blade and cuts the air once, twice, testing the art. He pauses, feels for the old rhythm, and then admits that it doesn't feel like it moves as well as it used to. Ariel nods as she thought. She explains that she may have repaired his nerves, but her magic can't heal the wounds in his soul. Gray blinks and echoes in a low voice, his soul. Ariel meets his eyes and says, yes, he heard that right. She adds that today's magic technologies haven't proven the existence of one soul yet, but she believes it does. Professor Ariel lifts her hand toward her glowing right eye and with a cool certainty, she says that after all, she can see it with that eye of hers. She says that even now his soul is slowly healing. She says that it will heal naturally as long as he does not overexert himself. Gray glances at his hand, thinking to himself not to overexert himself. He asks if he should refrain from practicing with swords. Then she answers that not at all. She says that it is fine if he exercises as he normally would. Rather than that, she says that she would like to know what kind of swordsmanship could harm one's soul like that. Gray laughs weakly. She explains that it is just that she learned a handful of swordsmanship that uses one soul to move the sword. Professor Ariel, watching him, suddenly says the name Amy White, and then she asks if he knows her right. Gray's mind stutters with a startled he thinks that. Why is he even surprised? He thinks that in the present day, a professor can easily find out. Even things like that. She tilts her head and asks him, is she wrong? She adds that the way he wields his sword gives the impression he learned it from Amy. On second thought, she says it may be a result of training. She goes on to say that the person he learned swordsmanship from seems to be a bit more skilled than Amy, although she adds, give it a few years and Amy will be just as skilled as his master. Gray thinks in shock that she even knew that far. Gray, trying to steer away, says that he learned his swordsmanship at a dojo in his hometown. He thinks that he has to change the topic. He thinks that if he lets this conversation continue, he might end up spilling everything. He asks if it is even possible for one soul to be damaged because of swordsmanship. She replies, not at all. She says that at the very least, not by ordinary swordsmanship. To begin with, she says, there is no way something ordinary could defeat an ogre general with just one slash, not to mention cutting down the surrounding ogres and trees, too. Gray says that so she already knew. She answers, of course, and with a playful flourish. She says that thanks to him, she has practically won the bet. She adds that she was shown some of the remains left at the scene and that they were incongruent. She says that not even the most advanced cleaving magic could have done that. Fixing him with that luminous eye, she says that the mysterious power within him. He stares back, tense. She continues by saying that he used it, didn't he? Gray asks if she can see it with her eye. Professor, she says, of course she can. She says that she can see the power leaking through the chain door. Gray's eyes narrow as that phrase chain door echoes through him. Gray thinks that it is not just something one can figure out by himself. Professor Ariel, however, says that. That being said, she has seen power similar to his before, though she says that she does not think they are the same thing, just that they have a similar vibe. Gray repeats similar power. He asks if there are others with powers similar to his. She says yes, though she says she is not sure if they are human or not. Then she names them. She says that they are called the Liquidator. She arches a brow and says so he has heard of them. Her golden eye gleams, and Gray's thoughts spike. He wonders why that name. Why is that name being mentioned in this time period? Professor Ariel hadn't expected the young man to be familiar with such an obscure being. Then again, she reminded herself he possessed knowledge of futuristic, magical theories, so perhaps it wasn't too shocking after all. Gray, meanwhile, felt uncomfortable receiving credit for a revolutionary idea when in truth, he was merely repeating what he learned from the real genius. Intrigued, Ariel asked how much he actually knew about the so-called Liquidator. Gray admitted that he didn't know much, but he insisted that the creature was an existential threat to humanity, one that must be stopped before it could amass greater power. He said that it was something that had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. Ariel found his view a little too extreme, though she agreed the Liquidator was dangerous. Still, she explained that Professor Bradley was intent on continuing his experiments related to the being. Gray asked what Bolin Bradley had to do with the Liquidator. She replied that from what she knew, the Liquidator was the very entity Bradley was trying to summon. That revelation shocked Gray. No one had ever told him that the world's future enemy originated from Bradley's own research. As he reflected, Gray realized that the Academy, at least in his previous timeline, had been the center of it all. The higher-ups had acted as if they already knew when and where the Liquidator would appear. It now seemed likely that the World Union Academy itself had played a direct role in summoning the creature. Both the professor and the secretive freshman agreed that this reckless experiment had to be stopped before it spiraled out of control. Unfortunately, the one conducting it was a tenured professor, and Ariel lacked the authority to intervene. She explained that she had already tried to convince the higher administration to act, but her efforts were ignored. Moreover, she said she wasn't allowed to reveal any further details to a student unless orders came from above. No one could legally stop Bailey and Bradley's madness. Gray had hoped at least to learn the names of the Academy's decision-makers, but that, too, was out of reach. It appeared the Academy's leadership was far more entangled than he had imagined. Still, he reasoned that if he could prove Bradley's criminality, they might finally have enough leverage to take action in his last life. Billions of illegal experiments had killed tens of thousands, and Gray knew exactly where those atrocities had taken place. He considered sharing that information with Ariel to catch the maniac in the act, but she immediately rejected the idea. Entering another professor's private lab without permission, she said, was a serious offense punishable by imprisonment. They would need to find another way to gather evidence. However, if Gray could provide concrete proof soon, things might change. For now, they had no choice but to wait. Ariel knew the risks, but was bound by politics and bureaucracy. It was frustrating for both of them, but understandable. Shifting the topic, she expressed curiosity about Gray's mysterious power. She hinted that there might be a way for him to control it, and mentioned a professor who specialized in unknown forces. Hathcat. Longfellow. Gray immediately recognized the name. Longfellow was the man who had once trained the Sword Saint, herself a legendary figure. Ariel knew that would get his attention. She promised to arrange a private session for the following day. Grateful, Gray accepted. After all, mastering his dangerous power was the reason he came to the Academy in the first place. He hadn't expected a solid lead so quickly. For once, things were beginning to look up. The next morning, Gray stood before the stoic Professor Longfellow, ready for his first private lesson. Ariel had worked fast, expecting complex theory or intense sparring. Gray was surprised when the older man took him deep into the woods and ordered him to run. They were still within Academy grounds, surrounded by dense forest. As Gray wondered about the purpose of this strange exercise, Longfellow scolded him for letting his thoughts wander. The professor told him to focus solely on running, to push his body until nothing remained. According to Longfellow, the soul's true power only awakens when the body is utterly exhausted. Gray wasn't allowed to touch his sword until every ounce of stamina was burned away. He couldn't yet grasp the lesson's deeper meaning, but he trusted Longfellow's methods completely. Still, while he ran lap after lap, the thought of Barley and Bradley conducting inhuman experiments knotted his mind. The knowledge of what was to come weighed heavily on him. Gray endured the training for an entire week. On the seventh day, he was summoned back to Professor Ariel's office, feeling a bit embarrassed. He confessed that all he had done was run and perform a few basic drills. Still, he admitted he felt a slight improvement in strength. Ariel laughed, clearly familiar with Longfellow's eccentric methods before their conversation could continue. A messenger entered the room and handed Ariel a sealed envelope. She opened it immediately, her expression darkening with each line she read. By the time she finished, she was frozen in shock. Concerned, Gray asked what was wrong. Without a word, she passed him the letter. It was from Barley and Bradley. The letter stated that Bradley had reviewed the report regarding Bella Albright's ether compression breakthrough. He claimed that despite appearances, the girl had not achieved the level claimed and thus her success could not be recognized. Therefore, he wrote, the surgical contract remained valid and the procedure would proceed as scheduled. It was madness, an insult wrapped in official language. Ariel was furious. Bradley was determined to seize Bella as a test subject, forcing her into a dangerous, unnecessary operation. The contract she had signed was airtight unless Bradley himself voided it. She would have to either submit to the procedure or face expulsion. Gray refused to accept such injustice. Ariel agreed. The absurdity of the letter finally pushed her past the limits of patience and politics. She said she needed Gray's help to locate Bradley's hidden laboratory. It was time to expose him for the criminal he was in. Nullify the contract through undeniable proof. This was exactly what Gray had been waiting for. With a hint of irony, he asked why she had suddenly decided to take action, after previously insisting that such a move was too risky. Ariel responded that they were far beyond legal boundaries. Now, she explained that she trusted Gray completely, and that protecting her students mattered more than protocol. Deep down, she had known he was telling the truth all along. It just took one insane letter to make her admit it. Now she was ready. Gray would lead the way, armed with knowledge of the future. And together they would expose Bailey and Bradley's crimes against humanity once and for all. As far as Gray knew, the vile laboratory was hidden deep within the mountains near the village of Toro, Illinois. Professor Ariel vaguely recalled hearing that one of the faculty members had once been granted authorization to construct a facility there. That revelation confirmed the worst: those illegal, inhumane experiments had been sanctioned by the Academy itself. There was no better place to conceal such horrors than the desolate Torwell Range. Hardly anyone ventured there, and even fewer would question a professor's prolonged absence. To make matters worse, Academy professors followed an unspoken rule never to meddle in each other's research. Still, Ariel reasoned that if they could gather enough evidence proving crimes against humanity, they wouldn't be condemned for trespassing. While they were mapping out their strategy, a knock echoed through the office door. Bella entered, clutching a letter in trembling hands. Her face was pale. Her eyes read the letter she carried contained devastating news, and her emotions spiraled between despair and anger. Ariel quickly took the letter from her, promising that the situation would be handled one way or another. It became clear that Ariel intended to confront Very and Bradley on her own, a notion Bella immediately rejected. She declared with fiery confidence that she could take on the madman herself if necessary. The young woman then turned to Gray with pleading eyes, silently begging him to stop the professor from going alone. Gray promised that he would accompany Ariel. His resolve gave Bella courage, and she volunteered to join as well. She said that she didn't want to stand by while others fought her battle. Ariel initially objected. She explained that Varian Bradley was not only an experienced scholar, but also a deranged individual with no value for human life. If he caught inexperienced students meddling in his work, there was no telling what he might do to them. As the adult in the room, she said she couldn't allow them to take that risk. Gray countered that her going alone was even more dangerous. He stated that he could call upon the same power he once used to defeat an ogre general if the situation demanded it. He assured her that he wouldn't be a burden. Besides, he argued, if something were to happen to Ariel, the Divine AI program would likely be dissolved, which would destroy any chance for him and his peers to remain at the Academy. He said that he preferred to take charge of his own destiny rather than have it dictated by others. Ariel saw the unwavering determination in their faces and realized she couldn't dissuade them. They would go whether she allowed it or not. Reluctantly, she agreed to make it an official team operation, but under one strict condition: their safety would always come first. Both Gray and Bella accepted without hesitation. After taking several precautionary measures, the trio set off into the misty Well Mountains. There, hidden between jagged peaks and twisted trees, stood Varian Bradley's sprawling private laboratory. Its massive structure loomed before them like a mausoleum built for the damned. It was hard to imagine what horrors were being performed inside those walls. Their mission was simple: collect undeniable evidence of his crimes and get out. Gray's eyes burned with anger as he confirmed they had found the right place. Bella, on the other hand, felt the first stirrings of fear. She doubted whether they could make it out unscathed. Ariel reassured them that her information was solid. Varian Bradley was supposed to be attending the Magic Society's conference at this very hour. The facility should be empty. Still, she warned that the main entrance was likely rigged with traps. The safest route would be through a side wall. After all, breaking into an academy-authorized laboratory was already a serious offense, so it made no difference how they entered before they began. Ariel gave Bella one last chance to back out. Bella clutched her staff and shook her head. She asked if the professor was truly willing to go through all this for someone like her. Gray replied that this mission wasn't just about saving Bella. It was about stopping Verizon's monstrous plans before they doomed countless others. He said that the fate of the world itself might depend on it. Ariel thought his statements sounded overly dramatic, but she agreed that the madman had to be stopped. She told Bella to stop blaming herself. This wasn't just her burden to bear. With that, Ariel led the charge, pulling Bella along while Gray sprinted beside them when they reached the towering sidewall of the laboratory. Ariel raised her hand and unleashed a powerful fire spell. Streams of blazing energy tore through the reinforced concrete, exploding outward with a deafening roar. The entire mountain lit up with blinding flames. One thing was certain: Ariel knew how to make an entrance. Gray was the first to step forward and peer into the gaping hole. What he saw froze his blood. The long corridor beyond was lined with prison cells stretching into darkness. Inside those cages were emaciated figures, barely recognizable as human. Some were unconscious. Others were bleeding or missing limbs. A few appeared already dead. They had expected to find evidence of crimes, but not this soon. Not this gruesome proof of Verizon's atrocities was everywhere. As they moved down the hallway, every iron cell revealed more victims, each one broken by forbidden experiments. Ariel quickly noted traces of 14 separate, outlawed spells, any one of which would be enough to condemn him. The sheer scope of the human rights violations was staggering. Eventually, they reached a massive chamber at the heart of the facility. The floor was slick, with dried and fresh blood, and in the center lay a massive magic circle, glowing faintly crimson. It resembled a ritual altar pulsing with residual energy. Their initial plan had been simple: get evidence and leave. But Bella couldn't bear to abandon the prisoners. She said that they couldn't just walk away. Gray, however, sensed danger. Something felt terribly wrong. He warned that a rescue would take too long, and that Varian could return at any moment before they could decide. A figure materialized from the shadows ahead. He moved leisurely, almost arrogantly, as though strolling through his garden. Ariel immediately recognized the man's grotesque face and the madness in his eyes. It was Varian Bradley himself, the twisted genius responsible for all this. Gray instantly drew his sword, bracing for a fight. Varian sneered and announced that the man attending the conference in his place was merely a double. He said that he was on the verge of a major breakthrough and couldn't possibly leave now. The true nightmare had just begun. Varian Bradley bragged that he had recently secured some exceptionally fresh materials for an important ceremony. He explained that he preferred his human test subjects alive, flesh still warm, hearts still beating, because their energy produced far better magical results. But upon seeing Professor Ariel and her two beloved students standing in his lair, he decided to alter his plans. Ariel's instincts screamed with alarm. She feared for her students' safety. Bella stood frozen in place, her body locked by primal terror, while Gray's grip on his sword tightened, his every muscle ready to strike. Varian sneered that this night's experiment might yield extraordinary results. After all, what could be more powerful than live subjects with exceptional magical potential? He muttered that he didn't know how they had discovered his secret facility, but he was certain they had come here, and officially, that meant no one else knew their location. If they were to vanish, no one would ever find their bodies. He laughed softly, confident that whatever gruesome fate awaited them would never raise suspicion. That wicked grin alone was enough to make anyone wish for his immediate execution. From his rambling, it was clear that Varian intended to turn them into living catalysts to stretch the limits of magic for human suffering. Since they had seen too much, leaving them alive was no longer an option. He decided that if they were to die, he would at least make use of their potential first. As he launched into a pompous monologue about transcending human limitations, a blinding explosion of fire interrupted him. The spell struck the room with a violent burst, scorching everything in sight. But to his surprise, the attack hadn't come from Professor Ariel. It came from Bella Albright herself. Her fear had vanished, replaced by raw determination. She had acted before anyone else could. Yet despite her courage, the strike failed to hit its mark. Varian had raised a magical barrier just in time, the flames dispersing harmlessly around him. Still, he commended the girl's talent and quick judgment, remarking that Ariel's divine eye had clearly chosen well. He even used the "perhaps he should pay closer attention to that controversial special admission badge in the future." Even so, he declared that an academy student trying to assassinate a professor was laughable. The gap in power was simply too vast. Bella, however, had already accepted that if she was going to die, she'd rather go down fighting than wait to be slaughtered. Ariel, seeing how the situation was spiraling, ordered her students to retreat. She insisted that they already had the evidence they needed. The academy could handle the rest, but Varian had no intention of letting them escape. Before they could move, he unleashed a surge of burning black energy from his scepter. The dark spell targeted Bella, who froze like a deer in headlights. Ariel acted instantly, summoning a radiant barrier to protect her students. The searing energy struck, consuming everything in its path. Varian taunted them, saying the defensive magic was useless against his gluttony flame. The result of years of painstaking research. The spell, he explained with glee, devoured magic itself, feeding on barriers and turning their energy into fuel. It was nearly indestructible, he claimed. Its only drawback being the rare biological materials required to cast it. As he spoke, Ariel's barrier began to crumble. The gluttony flame nodded, her defense growing stronger with every moment, gritting her teeth. She called upon the divine eye, channeling its mysterious power to hold the fire at bay. She managed to erect a second barrier just before the first shattered entirely, but the second layer met the same fate. The black flames tore through it in seconds. Knowing she couldn't last long, Ariel threw a spell memory pouch toward Bella and Gray. She said that if Death could Longfellow ever received it, he would know what to do. Bella, however, refused to flee. Instead of running, she erected a barrier of her own to reinforce her mentors. Ariel panicked, shouting that this wasn't what they agreed on. She reminded Bella that their deal was clear if things went wrong. Survival came first. Very power was far beyond anything they could handle. Even as Ariel protested, her spell finally collapsed. The impact sent a painful shock through her body. But Bella immediately filled the gap. Her translucent barrier flared up, matching the black flames with astonishing precision. Bella analyzed the attack in real time, realizing that the spell wasn't invincible, it simply required a different magical frequency to counteract the moment she adjusted her defense. The flames stalled for the first time. Varian looked genuinely surprised. He shouted in disbelief, demanding to know how a mere student could have deciphered the countermeasure to such an advanced spell. Bella calmly replied that someone special had recently shared some unconventional theories with her. Someone whose insights had made every form of magic easier to understand. The realization made Varian's fury explode. He accused her of treachery and demanded the name of his supposed betrayer. With infuriating innocence, Bella refused to answer. She said that her mentor was just a student from the swordsmanship division, who enjoyed rambling about crazy ideas. Varian's composure cracked completely. His veins bulged as he screamed, grabbing a blood-red crystal from his coat. He crushed it in his fist, and the imprisoned souls inside howled as they were consumed by his spell. The gluttony flame swelled monstrously, morphing into a living inferno with a grotesque, hungry face. Though the sight was horrific, Bella admitted that his magic, in a purely technical sense, was magnificent. Still, she could feel her mana draining fast. Bradley estimated she could hold the barrier for maybe a minute longer. Ariel, realizing this switch to offense using her divine eye, she scanned the flow of magic and spotted a vulnerable point where the energy thinned. If she could project her mana just beyond Bella's barrier, she might land a decisive blow. Threads of luminous mana coiled around her fingers and shot toward the weak spot, but the flames devoured them instantly. Varian mocked her pitiful attempt, laughing that her offensive power was as weak as her convictions. Gray remembered hearing that Professor Ariel's specialty was not attack spells, but perception against a spell that fed on energy. Even her most focused strikes would only make it stronger. Bella's stamina was fading. Her arms trembled as the barrier began to waver. Ariel's expression darkened. This was exactly why she had wanted them to run with no other choice. Gray stepped forward. Bella questioned how he planned to reach Varian through the raging storm of magic. Gray, unfazed, said that he could handle it. Ariel immediately understood what he intended and shouted for him to stop. She warned that using his mysterious power again could destroy his healing arm or even kill him outright. But Gray saw no alternative. One of them had to end this, and he would rather die alone than watch them both perish in an instant. He moved, his body blurred for the roaring fire, a burst of crimson light illuminating the room. The gluttony. Flames split open as if cleaved by the will of a god. Varian barely had time to comprehend what had happened. The last thing he saw was Gray's blood-streaked sword flashing before his eyes, followed by the sharp separation of his own head from his shoulders. Just like that, the infamous Professor Varian Bradley met his end, executed on the spot for his countless crimes, and the young man who struck him down bleeding yet unbroken, was the one destined to alter the course of history forever. Bloodstreak, the crimson hall splattering the walls as two figures stood amid the wreckage. Bella lifted her gaze, lips parting in shock as she muttered a stunned sound. The cloaked body before them crumpled and skittered across the floor, leaving a slick trail behind. Professor Ariel adjusted her monocle, eyes narrowing to razor points, and admitted that it was her first time seeing the real thing with her own eyes. Then added with measured disbelief that the sight was staggering. The ceiling above them groaned. Blue slashes had carved into the vaulted stone, forming a fractured grid that began to collapse. Pebbles rained first, then heavy chunks of rubble. Bella flinched back and cried out in alarm, glancing upward just as the red-haired professor stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor with a flick of her wrist. Crimson sigils spiraled into a glowing lattice, catching the tumbling debris midair and lowering it aside with surgical precision. Exhaling, she rubbed her temple and admitted that the result had far exceeded her expectations. Her gaze then flicked toward the dark-haired boy, voice softening as she asked if his body was holding up. Gray flexed his right hand, feeling a dull ache, pulse up his arm and replied, that had hurt quite a bit. Numb too, but still functional. Ariel assessed his stance and remarked that his training was clearly paying off. He nodded slightly, conceding that it seemed that way. His mind drifted back to his past self. Back in the village. Back then, he thought an impact like that would have left him bedridden for days. Now it only left his arm throbbing. He allowed himself a faint smile, realizing that his training had truly paid off. Memory flickered through him. His stern, white-haired mentor laughing, insisting that once the fundamentals were mastered, any weapon could be wielded naturally. He gripped his cracked sword and met Ariel's gaze in silence, then lowering his head. She thanked him for saving them and apologized for forcing him to use that power. He waved it off, saying that she shouldn't worry. After all, he was the one who insisted they confront Varian Bradley. She expressed quiet gratitude, then added a warning. She told him not to use that mysterious power again for a while, or the damage might become permanent. The numbness still lingered in his arm, so he bowed his head and agreed. Gray cleared his throat and awkwardly apologized as Bella approached, eyes wide with curiosity. She asked if what he had just used was some kind of magic. Noting that she hadn't sensed any ether, she added that such power couldn't possibly be explained by ordinary magic. Ariel's monocle gleamed as she turned her tone for him but calm, saying she would prefer if Bella didn't investigate further or mention what she had seen. The younger mage faltered, confused, asking why. Ariel's expression hardened. Scarlet light danced across her palm as she said that if Bella couldn't promise silence, she would be forced to erase her memories. Bella quickly agreed, nervous but resolute, and asked if a magic contract would suffice. Ariel accepted. Runes shimmered between them, quills etched their names, and the pact was sealed. Bella exhaled shakily and asked what they should do next. Glancing at the unconscious victims scattered across the floor, she suggested tending to them before anything else. Ariel knelt beside one of the bodies, checked the pulse, and observed that the captives were only under a deep, magical sleep. She explained that while they weren't in immediate danger, they should still be transferred to the Academy's medical facilities with a few practice gestures. She cast golden barriers around each victim, ensuring their protection for now. Then she turned toward the darkened hallway, announcing that it was time to move deeper into the facility as they advanced. Their footsteps echoed through rows of glass vats and metal instruments. Bella murmured that seeing this place again still felt unreal. Ariel's expression darkened. She said that countless illegal experiments had clearly taken place here, most involving human sacrifice to forge magical catalysts or enhancement capacity. She frowned, noting that there were no records or evidence of research tied to the liquidator. Perhaps, she speculated, those studies were conducted elsewhere. Behind them, Gray slowed. Something about this didn't add up in his past life. This was the site of a catastrophic event that wiped out tens of thousands, but the area now looked too clean to controlled. He thought that the mere creation of catalysts could not have caused such devastation. His eyes dropped to the ground as a memory surfaced, poisonous miasma rising from beneath the earth. His heart clenched. Could something be hidden below? Ariel noticed his distraction and asked what was wrong. Bella called his name, but Gray remained deep in thought, scanning the floor. He suggested that whatever caused the disaster might lie underground. Ariel narrowed her eyes, studying the cracked tiles. After a moment, she murmured that she couldn't detect any hidden passages. Then her monocle flashed. She moved toward a blood-stained section of floor near a fallen cloak, knelt, and said that she could sense faint traces of short-range teleportation, magic. Scarlet symbols pulsed under her fingertips. She theorized that an access point below might only be reachable through teleportation. Judging by the energy residue, she estimated the distance at roughly 300 m. Gray frowned, asking if that meant something existed far beneath them and if they could reach it. Ariel said that she could open a similar gate, and proposed that they try. She summoned a towering crimson array that spread beneath their feet as the energy circle stabilized. She explained that if no space existed below, the spell would open only into solid earth. The light pulsed and then parted. All three leaned forward, breath catching far below. An immense chamber unfolded, tiered metallic structures stretching endlessly into darkness. Ariel's voice trembled as she admitted that she never imagined the space this vast existed beneath the lab. Bella gripped her staff tightly, saying that she could feel massive ether currents radiating through the area, particularly from a dome structure near the center. Ariel's gaze sharpened. She sensed something else mingling with the magic, a foreign energy vast and overwhelming, unlike anything she'd encountered. Sweat trickled down her temple as she confessed that its magnitude was beyond comprehension. Gray's eyes fixed on the dome, and he quietly wondered if the foreign power could be what he feared. Ariel gave a single grim nod and declared that it was indeed the Liquidator's power. They descended the spiraling steps toward the massive dome structure, the air thick with static hums and violet haze. At the base, a narrow slit of metal gleamed on the curved wall. Gray stepped forward, studying it, and remarked that it looked like a door. His brow furrowed as he tilted his head toward the ceiling, where a stone slab embossed with a signal hovered above. Again, he muttered, puzzled that it was a door. Professor Ariel's monocle glinted as her gaze swept across the vast chamber. She murmured thoughtfully, confirming that the power they were tracking was definitely emanating from here. Yet, she added, there was no trace of the Liquidator's presence. Bella, clutching her staff, looked uncertain and asked whether tampering with it was wise. Ariel told her to stay calm. Tracing the seam of the metal slit with her fingers, she explained that the door itself held no power. It was merely symbolic, a part of the ritual's outer shell. Casting a quick glance over her shoulder, she asked if they understood what that meant. She paced the chamber's perimeter, eyes darting toward the glowing conduits snaking across the floor and the crystal pylons humming softly. The real energy wasn't in the door, she said, but in the network surrounding it. Violet liquid pulsed through the glass columns, and lightning sparked within a second. Later, the runes etched into the floor flared to life, and a blinding red ritual circle blazed open around the central pedestal. Wind tore through the room. Gray shielded his face, shouting in alarm, asking what was happening and whether Ariel was trying to summon the Liquidator herself. Bella winced. Her voice tense as she said the magic felt unstable, urging that they should shut it down before it was too late. Ariel, however, kept her composure, circling the pulsing ray. She told them not to interfere, explaining that her calculations showed the structure wasn't capable of summoning the Liquidator. A sharp crack fractured the air. The very fabric of space rippled, forming spiderweb fissures above the circle. Gray looked up, exclaiming that the space was tearing apart. Bella cried out for the professor, but before panic could set in, the tremors ceased. The red light dimmed to a flicker, leaving only a faint hum. Both students caught their breath, exchanging bewildered looks. Ariel's gaze settled on the nearest device, its interior glowing a soft pink. She nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory. She explained that the machines weren't designed to call the Liquidator directly. They merely opened a microscopic tear toward its domain, siphoning the residual power that leaked through. Her eyes drifted upward toward the centerpiece, a crystallized core suspended by chains, faintly pulsing with a sickly light. She added that the core construction relied on human lives used as the medium for crystallization. Following her gaze, Gray and Bella stared up at the faceted mass. Ariel assessed its density and concluded that around 10 souls had been consumed so far, though she suspected the real number was much higher. Most of the people they found upstairs, she said grimly, were likely harvested as material. Bella's voice quavered as she asked why anyone would go to such horrific lengths. What purpose could justify it? Ariel folded her arms and said that Bella had already seen the answer. She referenced the black flame Varian had wielded earlier, explaining that the gemstone that powered it was an unfinished prototype of these crystals standing beneath the suspended core. Ariel elaborated that the resulting catalyst wouldn't be limited to enhancing flames if mass-produced. The substance could potentially amplify any form of magic to catastrophic levels. Her gaze drifted back to the door as its crack sealed shut. On their own, Gray realized aloud the Virian's goal had never been to summon the Liquidator at all. Ariel agreed, but said she couldn't determine whether he had lacked the means or simply chosen another path. She examined the humming devices, her monocle reflecting their glow, and remarked that the space-rending machinery had already reached its limit. It was likely the cultists could only manage this much with their resources. Bella traced her fingers over a nearby column, marveling at its precision and saying she had never seen spatial warp technology so advanced. She noted that building even one of these constructs would drain an entire nation's treasury, and there were 8 of them here. Ariel's expression darkened as he said that only one institution could afford such an operation. Bella hesitated, suggesting the Discard Empire, but Ariel dismissed the idea immediately. She explained that while the Empire was vast, it lacked the magical research infrastructure to produce even a single device like this. Bella frowned, asking who else could possibly wield such power and resources? Ariel says that it has to be an organization that dwarfs even the Empire in magical research. Gray stepped forward between the pillars and said that it could only be the World Union Academy. Bella's eyes widened, but Ariel confirmed it with quiet certainty. She said no other organization had the expertise, funds, or manpower to sustain research of this magnitude. Bella protested, saying the Academy was meant to protect humanity from threats, not create them. Ariel said she understood the disbelief, but insisted the facts were undeniable. Gray interjected that this didn't mean the entire Academy was corrupt. Most of its members likely still fought for humanity's sake. In his mind, he remembered the last days of his previous timeline, when the Academy's elite forces stood at the front lines to defend civilians until their final breath. He couldn't bring himself to see them as humanity's enemies. Ariel gave a slow nod, agreeing that most of the Academy's staff probably acted in good faith. But she added that with such a vast institution, thousands of researchers, hidden departments, and countless facilities, no one could ever grasp the full picture. Whoever backed Varian, she said, had powerful support from within the system. He could never have built all this on his own authority. Bella tightened her grip on her staff, asking if that meant they couldn't trust the Academy completely. Ariel replied that after decades of service, she knew the Academy well enough to say it wasn't an organization one should blindly rely on. She added that most people inside truly believed they were serving humanity's best interests. Even those behind this experiment might have convinced themselves they were acting for the greater good. The thought lingered coldly among them. Gray asked if there was any way to trace the mastermind. Ariel examined the machines, saying there were no communication tools or magical signatures left behind. The setup had been meticulously scrubbed clean. Finding even a trace would be nearly impossible. She began to add that besides, the floor shuddered violently, cutting her off. Shockwaves rippled through the chamber as explosions ignited across the perimeter. Fire surged from the conduits, consuming the walls. Gray raised his arm to shield himself, shouting in confusion. Ariel steadied herself against the blast and deduced that the lab had been fitted with self-destruct mechanisms to erase all evidence. She noted that the detonation hadn't triggered immediately upon Vivian's death. Perhaps they had intended to lure intruders before setting it off. Bella shouted over the noise that this was no time for theories. They had to escape. Ariel lifted a hand, golden runes swirling beneath their feet, and told her to stay calm. These were only magical explosives, she said. Her hair whipping in the heated wind, her voice cut through the chaos with cold authority as she declared, the professors of the World Union Academy were not weak enough to be killed by something like this.